Welcome to Behind the Ballot, where politics meets real life. We break down state and federal issues, showing how policy shapes everyday Americans. Engaged, balanced, and informative, that's our promise. I'm your host, Mikkel Jenkins, and today we have a special guest for our listeners today. We have Mussab Ali, who is running in New Jersey's 8th Congressional District. Mussab, thank you for joining us today. And before we get into the topics and questions that we have for you, I just want to let our listeners know kind of where you got your start and how are you now running for Congress?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. I got my start, man, 10 years ago, which is crazy because I'm 29. And so like most people hear that and they're like, how does that make any sense? But I actually first ran for office when I was 19. And it's a wild journey because that was, Trump 1.0, right? Like 2016, I was on the same ballot as Donald Trump. And now here we are 10 years later, seeing the sort of destructive effects of everything that's happened over the time that he's been in the administration. That's kind of like where I got my start. I started when I was 19. I ran for school board. I didn't win. And then I sort of, got elected when I was 20 and have been in politics ever since.
That's amazing that you've been running for office since 19 and now you're 29. I'm 29 as well. And I love that you're now running for Congress and fighting for the people of New Jersey, especially within the 8th Congressional District. And I want to get into economic justice. So as you've campaigned, you have advocated for rent control, taxing the ultra wealthy and rejecting corporate influence to create an economy that supports renters and low-income families in New Jersey's 8th Congressional District and within the state, where many struggle with basic needs. So in the district where 1 in 4 residents skip meals to pay bills, how would you address the moral and practical challenges of taxing the rich more aggressively, especially if this risks capital flight leaving from New Jersey?
Yeah. So the really cool thing about what we're trying to do here is we're trying to increase taxes federally, right? So basically, as long as you're an American citizen, you hold that American passport, this applies to you regardless where you live, right?
Yeah.
Fascinating. New Jersey, we just, there's a ranking that came out. We literally are dead last in terms of how much support we are taking from the federal government. And so what is really important here is actually, trying to make sure New Jersey is getting its fair share, but also, right, like we can increase federal minimum wage, right? New Jersey has sort of been a leader in the Northeast, but like we can do better. Federally, we can increase minimum wage. That's been suck. It's like 7.25 for the last 15, 20 years. It's sort of embarrassing how low that wage is. At the same time, the people at the top, I think have an obligation to be giving more back to society. And we can use that to invest in healthcare. We can use that to invest in schools, our roads, our infrastructure. America at one point in time was a country where everyone would look at us and say, wow, that is the American dream, right? The idea of dreaming bigger. Today, we are playing catch up with the rest of the world, right? It's an embarrassing thing. Anyone who travels outside of this country, can experience, these high-speed trains in Japan, in China, can look at the infrastructure that takes place there. And it sort of really puts us back to say, wow, like what are we doing as a country for our people?
Yeah, no, definitely across the board. And kind of what were your reactions from Mike Sherrill's first budget?
Yeah, so I just looked at that budget. I'm honestly kind of excited. It's the first time I've seen the governor come out and really say, look, like we're going to end these corporate tax loopholes. We're going to crack down on some of the spending that's been taking place. And she's really put herself in opposition with some people in the legislature. So we'll see how, where push comes to shove and how that ends up. But she's made it very clear that, like, look, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter for Coughlin. Like, who is the governor, and she's going to set the direction of where this country's going to go.
Without a doubt, and I'm actually a policy analyst for New Jersey Council of County Colleges. So this is actually the first budget we were able to see our 20 million not removed from the proposed budget, because every year we have been having to fight for that critical funding. And then I want to move to actually education equity. So inspired by your tenure as Jersey City's Board of Education president, where you achieved milestones like raising teacher salaries and eliminating lunch debt for students. Reflecting on your achievements in that school, such as fixing lead in water and securing full funding. What systematic barriers at the federal level prevent similar progress at the nationwide level? And what pieces of legislation would you bring forth to put forth your vision?
Yeah, I actually think one of the boldest policy proposals we're going to put out there is a minimum level of funding for every single child across the country. And the reason to me that that's really important is like, in New Jersey, we're very lucky, right? There's this Supreme Court case that happened, Abbott v. Burke, that allows students across the state to benefit, where it's not just the poorest districts, being stripped of funding because there's low property taxes. We actually have subsidies from the rich to the poor, and like that's not a crazy concept. We can do that around the rest of the country. We can take money, from the wealthiest districts and sort of even the playing field here, because that's the only reason that I was able to get the education that I got, right? And so what I want to do is I want to build some sort of infrastructure that exists for that. I mean, right now, though, Department of Education is in the fight for their lives, even for Title I funding.
Yeah.
So before we can build, we are actually trying to play defense here. But I think that more and more, I think Americans have to come to the idea that it's not just about the individual; it's about the collective, right? And that the amount of money that we're spending detaining kids, the amount of money that we're spending on the military-industrial complex, right? Like, if we reinvested that money in our young people, I mean, the outcomes, the outcomes in sort of overall the quality of life for people across this country could be significantly better, and we just haven't done that.
Can be significantly better. And we've seen from various angles the Trump administration just try to strangle the Department of Education. And we've seen various legislators, try and, fight that fight. And I love the way that you're positioning yourself in a way on that education angle. And I kind of want to get into healthcare as well, drawing from your support for Medicare for all and your own personal battles. Critics of Medicare for All could disrupt the existing insurance system, but how would you address fears of transition chaos, and what role should personal responsibility play in a universal system?
So the way that I think about this is, there's a lot of healthcare experts who are out there who talk about health insurance and the way that we need to expand Medicare. I think the way you do it in order to like offset this idea of, intersecting with private insurance companies that already exist is it's a gradual rollout, right? So right now you get Medicare when you turn 65. Okay, let's make it so that eventually, right, and like very quickly though, it drops to 55, then it drops to 45, then it drops to 35, right? And sort of as you do that expansion, what that allows you to do is over time, as you're adding more and more people, it's not overnight the insurance industry is gone. Slowly over time, more and more people are enrolling, more and more people are getting access to this healthcare, and more people are sort of getting access to a quality of life thing that the majority of the industrialized world does, right? I mean, people talk about Medicare for all like it's a sort of like radical left-wing idea. And the anchor on TV who asked the question. And I looked at her and I said, Medicare for all is not radical. Like, this is the popular policy position, right? Like, this is where we all need to be. And in fact, as you see the rising cost of healthcare sort of throughout the country, to me, like, having Medicare for all, having these sort of systems where we are approaching healthcare in a way that's, protecting everybody and actually providing care, as opposed to seeing it as a profit-making industry, is the exact direction that we need to be heading in.
Yes, and it being a profit-driven industry is really where you see the footholds within the system. Everyone's going bankrupt just over even a medical bill itself, and even the strides and pieces of legislation that we have seen from various Democrats that they even tried to put up have not gone anywhere. And we've seen from even this, they call it the one big beautiful bill, but all of the cuts just in that drastically just make everything a lot more difficult in that certain sector. So I do believe, like, from what you're saying, you're going to be a fighter for healthcare equity across the board for everyone, because it's really something that can, put you back and set you back by a milestone if, you have such high out-of-pocket cost, and or you have just, emergency care that needs to be situated. And then we know the Trump administration has been very alarming with their immigration enforcement. And even, I believe it was today, they're actually stating for Republicans not to even talk about mass deportations as the midterms are starting to roll around. And we know that you've made calls to abolish ICE, rooted in your immigrant roots and family experiences with post 9/11. What alternative structures would you propose to replace ICE? And if ICE were to stay, what would be some reforms, and how might you better protect immigrant communities while addressing legitimate concerns about border control?
Yeah, again, I think that what's fascinating to me is that abolishing ICE has now also become a centrist position. When we started our campaign, it was still considered a leftist position, and we feel very proud of the fact that it is now the common thing to say. And I know it's the centrist position because my opponent is saying it, and he's a very centrist Democrat. So the fact that
Yes.
he's
Yeah.
on board saying that tells me where the temperature of the people is. Look, I don't think ICE can be reformed. I think if you look at who is being hired by these agencies, you look at the directive that these people have, these are not people who are interested in actually taking care of our immigration system. They're interested in meeting quotas, right? And you actually are starting to have Republicans who are bucking the trend, who are saying, look, like this isn't acceptable. I can't see my constituents who are American citizens who have gone here illegally being rounded up like this, because the way it impacts them politically is just not in a positive light, right? And this is why Republicans aren't talking about it. But I think more broadly, I don't think that we should just have open borders, right? And I think that the sort of trap that people fall in is Democrats are sort of speaking about immigration, and Republicans are posturing it like, oh, Democrats just want open borders. They want everyone to be able to come here.
Yeah.
That's not what we want, right? We want a system of immigration that works, a system of immigration where, people can actually apply for asylum and it's done in a speedy way. It's not somebody waiting for 15 years, not someone waiting for 20 years, right? We want a system of immigration that, recognizes people's humanity, right? A system of immigration where there's due process, a system of immigration where you are not scared to literally be picked up off the street just because you speak Spanish. You look at the way the Supreme Court has ruled on these issues, and what they've done is honestly such a disservice to the American people, right? Because basically what the courts have now said is if you speak Spanish, that is enough to be considered, reasonable suspicion, right? Like that's a cause for probable cause for picking up somebody. And then if you have the capacity to leave the site, which is to say you can walk away, they can detain you, right? So if you speak Spanish and you're walking, you are now a target for ICE. That's insane, right? Like there is no system in government. There is no sort of humane treatment that exists. That to me is completely should not happen. I think what's more important is thinking about how do we reform the immigration system, right? How do we think about what I used to do? How do we think about having due process? How do we think about making sure that people feel humanity is centered? But the one good thing that ICE has done for us is they've actually increased the amount of people who support immigration to this country. And it's crazy that it's taken this long, right? We've always known that immigrants have been a huge part of built this country. But now the sort of fears around the people at the southern border have completely reversed into people saying immigration is a net positive for this country. And that's, I guess, the silver lining in all of this.
Yes, it's definitely a net positive, and it's great that people are starting to see the real truths of ICE and how it's being paraded by this administration, because you had even from Obama's era, he was able to be one of the largest deporters of illegal immigrants, but you never saw this level of chaos and mayhem and damage within the streets caused by an administration that is forcing this on various states. And as we know, he also fired Kristi Noem as well. And then the Democrats have been pushing for several reforms on ICE. Do you agree with those reforms, or do you feel like they should go a step further?
I think that Democrats broadly in Congress, in particular leadership, has really not met the moment. And this goes on when it comes to ICE. This goes when it comes to the Iran war. So when it comes to ICE, this idea of reform being on the table, I think we should be very clear in saying we should abolish ICE. We should be very clear that this is what the American people want. And I think politicians don't give themselves actually enough credit in some way, which is to say, the majority of the way that most people govern is they wait for the public to push them in a direction. I don't think they realize their capacity to actually push the public, right?
Yeah,
and this is my main contention, right? I've always been somebody who said, I will fight for what I believe in, even if it's not the popular position, right? Because I want the people to understand, like, what am I fighting for and how can we get there, right? Because again, I think that we're stuck in this trap of incrementalism. We're stuck in this way of thinking where people are just like, oh, there's only so little we can get. And partially it's the fault of these politicians, right? There's like, okay, like we got to wait until the temperature is there and then we can say the thing, versus saying what is actually good for the American people and getting everybody on board, right? Building those coalitions to exist. And so look, when it comes to ICE, like, I think that Democrats should be very clear about what we want, so that those of us that are saying abolish ICE, people don't think we want open borders, right? They understand sort of the narrative that we're putting forward. And at the same time, when it comes to Iran, right? Like, the American people do not want to go to war with Iran. And yet you have Democrats like Hakeem Jeffries saying, hey, it's not off the table. I might give more funding, right? I might give more funding to the military to continue what's happening in Iran. Like, why is that acceptable, right? And again, it goes back to this idea that I think is at the root of our politics and this corruption that's taken place, which is that Democrats and Republicans are getting money from the same sources, right? And so when these corporations are funding Democrats and Republicans, when these special interest groups like AIPAC are funding both sides, yeah, I mean, it's no wonder that sometimes it feels like the party of the Democrats is a very weak party.
Yes, no, without a doubt, they haven't met the moment. Both sides of leadership really haven't. And it's time for a new age of leadership to really take place and meet the moment where it matters. There's multiple times both Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries have fallen flat, and you've had individuals like AOC and or Mondami actually stand up and, take that bolden spot, which is where a lot of the new generation of Democrats is going towards. And that's a lot of policies that you stand on as well. And in speaking about the Iranian war, wanted to get into foreign policy and some domestic priorities as well. So you voiced your opposition to overseas conflicts in favor of domestic investments. Additionally, your stance to invest in schools and hospitals at home, not bomb them abroad, is bold. How would you handle international crisis where non-intervention might lead to humanitarian disasters?
Look, I think that if you look at any time the U.S. has gotten involved in terms of interventions, it has never ended in a positive direction. We have never gotten to a place where like, oh, we got involved and like, everything is great. I mean, you look at Iraq, you look at Afghanistan, right? You look at these conflicts that take place, and what America has done, it's increased the death toll in all these areas, right? Like, and I think the problem is, as Americans, like, obviously, we want to play this role around the world of being like the good guy, right? Of like, oh, we want to police the whole world. But the reality is the majority of the world doesn't see us that way. And we sort of lost sight of our moral compass here. I mean, you take what happened in Gaza as a prime example.
Yeah.
Over and over again in the United Nations, everybody in the world was like, please end this genocide. Please, like, let's get some more humanitarian aid. Like, let's stop the shooting. Let's stop the killing. And America on the Security Council over and over again would veto, right? Like, nah, keep it going, keep it going, keep it going, keep it going. And that is the direct American war machine, right? And so like, when you are morally so contradictory, right? I mean, and this is not the first time America has done this. America, also when we were fighting in the civil rights movement, right, was having people who were fighting in Vietnam, and people would be like, well, why are you fighting here? You don't even have rights in your own country. Right? Like, that is American history. Like, people around the world are not stupid, right? Like, I know Americans like to think very much about like ourselves. We're like, oh, like America is everything. People around the world will point out these hypocrisies, right? They'll say, hey, aren't you the nation that's talking about freedom and democracy for everyone, but like back home, you don't do that, right? Like, it's very, very obvious around the world. And what hurts is like, it hurts our standing, because then people look at Americans and like, we try to posture as like, oh, we're the good guys. But most countries see us coming in and are like, it's not the good guys who are walking in here, right? And again, I don't say this to say like, we don't have a way back, right? Because I would make the argument that like, what is the country, like if we're looking at the set of countries that govern the world, like, is it better to have an America-centric world or a China-centric world? I still think it's better to have an America-centric world. But I think the question is like, how do we get back to a place where America is seen as somebody that's operating with like, a real moral compass, that's operating to like, help humanity? Sorry about that. I think my internet cut for a
Oh,
second.
no, you're perfect. No, you're perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. But where you were saying with the Iranian war is exactly what I think Americans want from America. They want to see that level of integrity that we're losing across the board with all of our major partners. It's being reported that our allies aren't even sharing information with us, and now we have Russia and other adversaries sharing additional information with Iran, making the conflict just much harder. And now it's even reported that 7 U.S. service members have been killed with this conflict that is ongoing. So we're seeing this endless war just continuously going on and on and on, and we're just shelling out so much money for it. It was, I think $5 billion within the first 24 hours or last 5 days from the munitions that was used. That money alone could just restore and fund so many social services. And then from that, I want to ask you, what are some domestic priorities within New Jersey and within the congressional 8th district that you would prioritize and legislate?
I mean, look, if you want my dream, right? Again, I think Americans need to dream bigger. And
Yeah,
if you
I
want
agree.
my dream here is we get into the seat in the 8th district and we build big investments in mass transit, right? Like
Okay.
imagine, right, that we had a subway system from North Bergen all the way down to Jersey City, across to Elizabeth, across to Newark, and then that also still connects with like New York City. Like imagine what that would do for people's lives, right? Like you just hop on the
Yeah.
subway and you're like, oh, I get from North Bergen, I get to Union City, I get to West New York. Like we have a light rail that has supposed to be the Hudson Bergen light rail that still has not gone to Bergen County, right? Like that is where we want mass transit. But I think if we're dreaming big and you can say, look, like, why can't we have a subway system just like New York City, right? Like Hudson County is extremely dense, right? Why
Yes.
can't we make that investment? But again, the only way that kind of investment happens is it happens federally, right? Like we need federal dollars that come in that say, wow, you know what? Let's make a real investment here to expand mass transit. Let's have that expansion into Elizabeth. I mean, Elizabeth, what makes me really sad is I look at Elizabeth as a town. Elizabeth has one train station, man. And Elizabeth is a town of
Wow.
140,000 people. So like if you are not near this train station, like, yeah, you need a car to get around despite the fact that you are in such a urban dense area.
Which is insane to think that that level of investment hasn't come from the state, and we know that that's going to be very sparingly from the federal government and how Donald Trump has been targeting and attacking New Jersey specifically. But yes, your dream would be great. I would love to have interconnected transportation across the whole entire state for individuals who aren't able to have access to a car or have any other means of getting somewhere. And then I want to get into political integrity and your calls for rejecting corruption. Your campaign slogan, Choose Courage, which I love, emphasizes your refusal of corporate PACs and your challenge to entrenched power, promoting election and reforming democracy, and running against incumbent like Representative Rob Menendez Jr. How do you define dynasty politics, and what dangers does it pose to a representation in diverse districts like New Jersey 8?
Yeah. Look, part of me honestly feels a little bit bad for Congressman Menendez Jr. because of the name, right? Like he has the
Yeah,
same
yeah.
name as his father, who's now serving 11 years behind bars. And I make it very clear to people, I'm not running against the father, right? Like this is not a campaign where I'm like, you shouldn't vote for Menendez because of who his father is. But frankly, I don't think you should vote for Congressman Menendez Jr. because of who he is, right?
Yeah.
He has had 4 years to demonstrate a track record that have been different from his dad's. He has the exact same donors. He has the exact same policies, the exact same politics. And to me, like the frustration with that is we have seen that kind of politics not work, right? We have seen people over and over again say, look, we want something different. We want a fighter. And so in some ways, I think he and I are actually running the same campaign, right? He says to people, if you are happy with what I've done, you should vote for me. And I agree. If you're happy with the status quo, you should vote for Congressman Menendez. But if you want something different, you should vote for me. And I think the majority of the people across this country, forget this district, across this country, are not happy with the status quo.
Yeah.
People are angry. People are frustrated, and they have a right to be. You have people who are bought and paid for by special interests. I mean, Congressman Menendez, based on track AIPAC, has taken more than $1 million from AIPAC and its
Wow.
right?
Wow.
By the way, his father, right, The only people who were funding his legal fund, right, when he was going through all the corruption charges and all the gold bars
Mhm.
and everything going out, the only groups that were funding it were pro-Israel groups. Is that a
Wow.
surprise? Right?
Fitting.
Like you basically took the donors from your dad and said, "Hey, like I'm gonna keep doing it." Right? Like, my father's not here anymore, but I will continue the same legacy. I'll continue the same
Yeah.
politics. And keep in mind, his father was one of the most, aggressive people against Iran, right? I mean, the Iran nuclear deal that President Obama put together, Senator Menendez was the person who was like, "Yo, I'm not okay with this. Like, as a Democrat, I'm not okay with this," right? So, like, you are talking about someone who comes from that legacy, that line of thinking that has been extremely war hawkish towards Iran, has been unilaterally supported the state of Israel, right? And to me, like, that is disqualifying, right? You need somebody who has
Yeah.
independence, who is not taking money from these organizations, somebody who does not take money from corporations, right? Like, we talk about Medicare for all, and to me, it's the common sense solution. But for Congressman Menendez, right, because you take money from the pharmaceutical industry, you take money from insurance companies, he can't even dream that big, right? It's like, oh, like, why would you? That's such a crazy idea. And that's why, again, to me, it's like you need people who are fighting for what they believe in, who are fighting and standing up for everyday people. And the most important thing to that, and I say this to everyone across the district, is like, look, maybe you disagree with me, right? At least I'm fighting for what I believe in, not what I'm paid to say.
Mm. That's very strong. That is very strong, and I agree with that in the fact that he is coming from that same branch as Menendez Senior, and it's just going to be the status quo. And you are offering a better vision and a newer vision for not just New Jersey, but for that district specifically. And I know we have about like 4 minutes left, but lastly, just want you to give a message to our listeners and your voters as well as to why you stand out in the crowd and why you should be their representative.
Yeah, I think if you look at my track record, I've always been somebody that has chosen courage, right? When it comes to running for office when I was 19 years old against Donald Trump, when it came to doing really courageous things like increasing minimum wage, canceling lunch debt, fixing water fountains that have been broken for 15 years, all of those things required courage. And when I look at this country today, I say to myself, America is wealthy enough to care for everyone. You are in a part of this country and society where we have an American who's about to be a trillionaire. That does not say to me that America is losing its wealth. In fact, everyone talks about this K-shaped economy, which is the idea that the wealthiest Americans are really the people who are, taking care of our entire economic output because everyday people are struggling to get by. And so at a time when you have this incredible wealth inequality, we need people who have the political courage because America can care for everyone. The only thing missing is the courage to do it. And so I go to voters and I say to them, look, I am choosing that courage. I want you to choose courage with me. And again, this is not a movement of just one person. This is a movement that requires dozens and dozens of people to come together. Every week, we have dozens of people who are coming in and out of our office talking about this campaign, getting voters to care about what we're building. And to me, like that is the vision, right? Is like we can get people to dream bigger. We can get people to kind of believe that, like, what, America can actually be in a place where people trust Americans. We can be in a place where we're taking care of our people. We can be in a place where we call ourselves proud to be American. This sort of like American flag thing is so fascinating because if you and I were to drive by a home and you saw a home that had an American flag on its front porch, you automatically assume that's a conservative household, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of become this sort of symbol that only belongs to the right. And I think that the left needs to retake it. And I think we need to put ourselves in a position where, like, one day I would love to be in a position where everyone is proud to call themselves Americans because we're happy about our foreign policy decisions. We're proud about our domestic policy decisions. We're proud to be a place that actually values humanity, which I think is something that America's lost.
I completely agree. And that's a great message for not just New Jersey, but even on a national level. I feel like a lot of voters are really vibing from what you're saying. And they do want to be able to, be able to own that American flag as Democrats and as Republicans, because that's really what it's all about. We're all under the same flag and we all represent the same great nation. It's just about the values that we really want to put forward and also the pieces of, legislation and policy that individuals want to put forward that want to make things better for the average individual. And Mussab, thank you again for coming on to Behind the Ballot. And to our listeners, thank you for listening to Behind the Ballot, where we keep politics engaged, balanced, and informative. Stay curious, stay critical, and stay involved. I'm Mikkel Jenkins, and until next time, keep looking beyond the headlines and behind the ballot. Thank you.